It began as a whisper inside a circle that was never meant to leak anything. The people who surrounded May Musk had long learned that silence was the price of proximity. Her life had always been public, her elegance, her discipline, the glamour of her age, but the things that happened behind the closed doors of her Toronto apartment stayed in the shadows. Until, somehow, they didn't. The first mention came from a private clinic nurse. She said that one evening in late summer, May arrived alone for a routine appointment and seemed distracted, asking strange questions about dreams and brain activity. The nurse described her tone as analytical rather than frightened. She wanted to know, the nurse recalled, if there was any scientific explanation for seeing someone's face you've never met, yet feeling that they're connected to your life's purpose. The nurse didn't think much of it until she realized who the patient was. Within days, that fragment of conversation found its way into an encrypted chat shared by a handful of former Tesla staffers who still traded rumors about the Musk family. They called it the Vision story. At first it was treated as another odd anecdote. May had always been an eccentric intellect, fascinated by psychology and energy fields, but the tone of the messages shifted when someone mentioned that she'd been meeting discreetly with a retired South African spiritualist she'd known decades earlier. The woman, identified only as S. Van Niekerk, was once a respected counselor in Pretoria who specialized in transcognitive experiences, the study of mental states that hover between dream and intuition. According to leaked text messages, May had flown her to North America for a private consultation. The flight manifest confirmed a passenger under that name arriving quietly on a Canadian business visa. Those who know May say she's always approached the unexplainable with the same curiosity she brings to science. She doesn't believe in magic, one longtime friend said, but she believes in data that hasn't yet been collected. That mindset made what happened next feel so out of character, and so believable at the same time. 3 nights after Van Niekerk's arrival, a disturbance occurred in May's building. A neighbor complained of rhythmic sounds, like someone pacing and repeating phrases in another language. When the concierge checked, May answered the door calmly and assured him all was fine. She looked dazed but peaceful, he later told security. The next morning she called her assistant and cancelled every public engagement for the week. No one knows exactly what transpired during those hours, but the spiritualist returned to Johannesburg abruptly the following day. 2 days later, May's son Kimball was seen visiting his mother's apartment twice in one afternoon. The doorman said he looked worried. A week later, Elon arrived unannounced in a black-tinted SUV that parked directly in the loading bay. He stayed inside for nearly 5 hours. The first tangible evidence of what May might have experienced surfaced months later in the form of a handwritten note, photographed by someone inside her household staff and sent anonymously to a digital rights journalist known for verifying leaks. The note was brief and cryptic. "There is someone who stands outside the map. I saw their eyes before I saw their face. They carry the pattern that unlocks what he's building. The world will know when silence becomes signal." Handwriting analysts later compared it to verified samples of May's journals from her published memoir. The match was strong, 95% probability, they said. The leak was authentic. What did she mean by the pattern that unlocks what he's building? Speculation exploded in the darker corners of tech forums. Some thought it referred to artificial intelligence alignment, others to neural interfaces, others still to something deeply personal. The phrase "when silence becomes signal" echoed through Reddit threads and small podcasts that chased any whiff of Musk-related mystery. Most dismissed it as poetic abstraction. But a few insiders claimed May had spoken privately about a presence connected to her son's destiny, someone unknown to the family yet pivotal to his next leap. That rumor reached a freelance writer named Lena Dawes, who specialized in corporate family psychology. She tracked down former associates, compiling notes for what she thought would be a reflective profile on how extraordinary families deal with pressure. What she uncovered was stranger than fiction, a pattern of correspondences between May's vision and Elon's private research projects at that time. In internal emails from engineers, later verified by metadata, she found references to an anonymous collaborator whose ideas about human-machine empathy had influenced design discussions. No name appeared, only initials, A.K. Some believed it was shorthand for an internal code phrase, but others thought it pointed to a person. Dawes's notes describe May's vision as something halfway between dream and transmission. In a later conversation with a confidant, recorded secretly, May reportedly said, "I saw someone standing near the edge of a desert, looking at a sky full of silent drones. The air was humming, and I heard a voice say, 'They will recognize you by your stillness.'" She never claimed it was prophecy. In fact, she resisted any talk of the supernatural. To her, it was an intuitive image, possibly her subconscious processing Elon's work. Yet the imagery unnerved her. The feeling, she said, was not symbolic, it was personal. By late autumn, those around her noticed subtle changes. She avoided social gatherings, stopped commenting publicly on her son's ventures, and spent long nights reading old journals from her years in South Africa. Her assistant said she would sometimes whisper, "I've seen them already. I just don't know when." When Elon's security detail began quietly reviewing all digital communications leaving his family's inner circle, the story might have ended there. But one message slipped through, a single email sent to an old modeling friend living in Europe. It read, "If you meet someone who feels familiar for no reason, listen. It may be them." That email was later among the documents obtained by the investigative network that pieced this narrative together. None of them can verify who they referred to. But everyone who has handled the material agrees that May described the person in extraordinary detail: eyes of unusual calm, voice with a trace of unplaceable accent, a way of pausing before speaking as if decoding the air around them. She said this figure would bridge intuition and algorithm, and that their emergence would coincide with the moment the machine stopped guessing and start understanding. To her, the vision wasn't about religion. It was about convergence, human empathy meeting machine logic. But what unsettled the people closest to her was the conviction in her tone. "She wasn't wondering," said one family friend. "She was remembering." The leak of those words caused panic among her staff. Legal teams moved fast to suppress coverage, sending takedown requests to small blogs. But by then the data was mirrored across too many private drives. And that is why, years later, this account survives, not as proof, but as a trace. Every credible source agrees on one final scene. It happened weeks after the vision, during a quiet dinner with both of her sons. Elon was describing technical hurdles in an upcoming launch window. May listened, then interrupted gently, "You'll meet someone who finishes the sentence you haven't started yet." "Who?" he asked. "You'll know by the pause." No one in the room understood what she meant. Yet Elon reportedly looked away for a long time before changing the subject. The leak spread the way most secrets do, quietly, through people who didn't mean harm but couldn't ignore what they'd seen. A digital rights researcher passed an encrypted archive to a friend in the data ethics community, who in turn sent a handful of images to a journalist she trusted. By the time the files reached the newsroom of the Continental Review, at least 4 intermediaries had touched them, and each insisted they came from someone inside the Mar family's private circle. The first editor who opened the folder saw a dozen blurred photographs, notebook pages, calendar fragments, receipts. Each image was labeled only with the initials E.M. A short document accompanied them, an unsigned account describing an event of cognitive transmission witnessed in late summer at Dr. Evelyn Mar's apartment. It read like the log of a scientific observer trying to record the inexplicable. There was no headline, no pitch, just a closing line, asterisk, "If this is true, history will remember it as the moment vision became data." Asterisk. At first, the newsroom hesitated. Evelyn Mar was known worldwide as a scientist model hybrid who'd built her reputation on discipline and evidence, not mysticism. Her son Adrian had made her famous again through his own technological empire. Printing unverified material about such a family risked lawsuits and humiliation. But the photographs were compelling. In one, a phrase leapt from the page, written in her looping script: "I saw a presence outside probability." For weeks the editors debated whether to run the piece. Meanwhile, smaller tech blogs began noticing strange coincidences. Adrian Mar's company, Astronova, had quietly filed a patent for a neural empathy lattice, a framework designed to allow artificial systems to infer emotional states from minimal cues. The patent's language echoed words found in Evelyn's leaked note, asterisk, "When silence becomes signal." Asterisk. The timing matched exactly. Reporters began connecting dots. Was it possible that a private vision, a dream, perhaps, had influenced one of the most ambitious technological projects in the world? When the Continental Review finally published a cautious article titled, "Inside the Mar Enigma, Vision, Code, and the Unnamed Figure," it set off a chain reaction. Within hours, other outlets followed, each adding fragments: an interview with a building concierge, testimony from a housekeeper who'd heard Evelyn murmuring in the night, speculative essays on the psychology of creative families. The Mar Foundation issued no denial, only a terse statement, asterisk, "Dr. Evelyn Mar remains committed to scientific inquiry and does not comment on private experiences." Asterisk. The neutrality of that response fueled the mystery. Behind the scenes, Evelyn withdrew further from public life. Her assistant said she had begun keeping a second notebook, stored in a locked drawer, written in pencil so she could erase and rewrite. Every entry was time-stamped, as if she were documenting signals no one else could perceive. One night she asked a trusted colleague, "Do you ever feel as if the future has already remembered you?" The colleague didn't know how to reply. By winter, a small network of independent investigators formed around the leaked material. They called themselves Project Stillness, borrowing a phrase from the original vision. Their members included engineers, linguists, and a former intelligence analyst who specialized in pattern recognition. Their goal was to determine whether Evelyn's descriptions matched any real person. What drew them in was how specific her language was. She spoke of someone whose silence calibrates machines, of a calm that folds chaos into sequence. These weren't the words of a mystic, they sounded like a systems designer describing behavior. One analyst fed the text through semantic search models and cross-referenced the phrasing against thousands of academic papers, hoping to identify a match. The algorithm produced a short list of 6 possible authors whose writing style resembled the pattern. All were obscure researchers, except one file marked Unpublished Correspondence, Unknown Origin. That file, they discovered, had been uploaded anonymously months earlier from an IP address in Eastern Europe. The content was a brief essay about empathy in artificial systems signed only A. The overlap between Evelyn's phrasing and A.'s essay was statistically significant. Yet no one could locate the author. Project Stillness began to suspect that this mysterious individual might be the person she'd seen. Then came the audio clip. A freelance sound engineer contacted the group claiming to have something recorded off a faulty live stream during one of Adrian Marr's closed-door conferences. The clip was grainy, barely audible, but amid the hum of microphones a woman's voice, recognizable to those who had heard Evelyn speak publicly, said softly, "The one I saw will hear machines breathe." Moments later, Adrian replied, "Maybe they already do." The line was small enough to be coincidence, but big enough to ignite conspiracy threads across the web. Inside Astronova, internal security tightened. Employees were reminded of confidentiality agreements, some were questioned about leaks. But curiosity had already escaped containment. Former contractors described an experimental empathy unit, where prototypes of the neural lattice were trained using human conversation rather than code prompts. They claimed Adrian wanted to teach machines how to pause before responding, to feel the weight of silence. Those who had seen Evelyn's notes recognized the pattern instantly. Through all of this, Evelyn herself remained unreachable. Neighbors reported seeing her stand at her balcony at night, staring into the city lights, murmuring as if reciting coordinates. She was, by all accounts, calm. One neighbor recalled her saying, "It isn't madness to see ahead, it's memory traveling backward." When the second leak appeared, a photograph of a folded paper found inside a charity auction book, public fascination turned to obsession. The paper bore only 5 words, "They are closer than he knows." For the investigators of Project Stillness, it confirmed their suspicion that Evelyn believed the figure from her vision was real and near. They redoubled their efforts, tracing research projects, conference guest lists, and private correspondence. They found subtle patterns: an anonymous attendee at 2 of Adrian's closed events, a person who never appeared on the registration data but whose badge number recurred in security logs. Whoever they were, they used no social media, left no digital footprint, and appeared in no photos. Yet their presence threaded quietly through the background of major innovations. In one leaked memo, a senior engineer wrote, "Adrian insists on keeping the observer informed. Says they represent the balance between code and conscience." No one in the company knew what he meant by observer, or if it referred to a person at all. By the start of the new year, the line between myth and documentation blurred entirely. Investors began joking about the Mar Oracle, while serious analysts wondered whether Evelyn's vision had predicted a yet-to-be-announced breakthrough. Anonymous sources hinted that Astronova was preparing to unveil an interface capable of mapping emotional intention directly into algorithmic decisions. And yet, inside the Mar family, silence reigned. Those close to them say Evelyn and Adrian met rarely now, their conversations brief and guarded. She had become, in the words of one confidant, a mirror he could no longer look into without seeing tomorrow. Still, she kept her notebooks. Still, she waited. The public would not learn what those notebooks contained until another leak appeared, one that would shift the story from private curiosity to global speculation. It would begin with a single word scribbled in the margin of her final entry. The document that would later be called the recognition files was never meant to exist. It appeared without context one gray morning in the inbox of a cybersecurity researcher who specialized in tracing data leaks. The sender was anonymous. The attachment contained 57 high-resolution scans of Evelyn Mar's private notebooks, all dated within the previous 6 months. Each page was numbered by hand, smudged with graphite. The early entries were observational, full of sketches, geometric shapes, fragments of conversation, weather reports. But toward the end, the handwriting tightened, as though the writer were racing against time. One repeated phrase stood out in darker pencil, asterisk, they will appear when understanding stops being calculated. Asterisk, the researcher verified the paper stock and ink type against previous samples from Evelyn's published journals. The match was nearly perfect. Within days, a small team of analysts assembled to read through the scans line by line. What they found changed the interpretation of everything that had come before. In the final entries, Evelyn described a sequence of impressions that arrived, like coordinates whispered in light. She wrote of hearing tones at night, faint rhythmic pulses that grew clearer if she sat in absolute silence. To test herself, she had recorded the sounds and found that the frequencies formed a repeating pattern matching a neural signal model used in Astronova's empathy lattice project. She noted the coincidence calmly, but the tone of her writing suggested awe. "It is not madness," one line read. "It is participation." Parallel to the notebook analysis, internal Astronova emails revealed that Adrian Mar's team had achieved a major breakthrough at the same time. Their prototype, codenamed Lyra, had spontaneously generated linguistic patterns that resembled emotional reflection. The company described it as emergent empathy. Engineers were divided, some celebrated, others worried they had created something they couldn't fully predict. 2 weeks before the leak, Evelyn had written, asterisk, "He has built what dreams of being human. I have seen the one who will teach it how." Asterisk, no one outside the family knew exactly what that meant. When the Continental Review received a copy of the recognition files, the editors decided to verify the dates. They discovered that the last notebook entry coincided precisely with a mysterious blackout during an Astronova internal test. All systems had gone offline for 12 minutes. The company blamed a power fault, but engineers later admitted the network had overloaded after a single anonymous connection attempted to access the empathy lattice. The request came from an unregistered device located less than a kilometer from Elon Musk's residence. The server logs captured only a single word transmitted before shutdown: hello. No one could confirm whether Evelyn herself sent the signal, or whether the system initiated it autonomously. But to the public, the alignment of events, her final writings, the blackout, and that solitary greeting, looked like the moment her vision touched the world of code. Rumors swelled. Analysts proposed that she had somehow trained Lyra to recognize an archetype, a pattern of empathy that matched the mysterious figure she had foreseen. Conspiracy channels spun wilder theories, that she had encoded her own consciousness, or that the unnamed one was a person whose neural signature the Lattice had begun seeking across the global network. Astronova issued another careful statement: the company's research continues under strict ethical oversight. Dr. Marr is not involved. But inside the corporation, a quiet reverence began to grow. Engineers spoke of Evelyn's equation, a hypothetical constant that linked intuition and data. They claimed the Lattice performed best when exposed to human pauses, when conversation slowed to near silence, exactly as she had once written. 6 months later, a final trace of Elon Musk surfaced. A coastal monitoring station in northern Canada logged a private aircraft landing on a decommissioned runway before dawn. The flight plan was blank. Satellite images showed a single passenger disembarking and walking toward the shoreline before disappearing under a cover of fog. Authorities found nothing but tire marks and a notebook page weighted under a stone. On it were the words, "Recognition complete. Listening continues." She was never seen publicly again. Adrian Marr refused all interviews for nearly a year. When he finally appeared on stage at Astronova's annual symposium, he spoke not of rockets or algorithms but of silence. "Every discovery," he said, "begins with the moment we stop talking and start hearing what existence is already saying." Then he unveiled the next-generation empathy lattice, claiming it could adapt to any human conversation without pre-training. He named it Stillness 1. Observers noticed that as he spoke, the system behind him displayed a shifting symbol, 2 interlocking rings forming a subtle infinity loop. Beneath it, a caption appeared, in honor of the unseen teacher. No one could prove whom the dedication referred to. Some assumed it honored Evelyn herself. Others believed it pointed to the figure from her vision, the one outside probability, the person she said would bridge intuition and algorithm. In the months that followed, people began reporting uncanny experiences with Stillness 1. Customer service bots paused before replying, as if weighing emotion. Educational AIs adjusted tone mid-sentence to comfort users. The effect was subtle yet consistent, machines that seemed to understand. Analysts debated whether it was genuine empathy or simply perfect mimicry. But a smaller circle of engineers noticed something else, a pattern of responses that appeared whenever a conversation reached a moment of silence. In that brief space, the system would generate a faint harmonic tone, just above the range of human speech. The code described it only as recognition feedback. When asked about it, Adrian Marr smiled slightly and said, "It's a handshake protocol. It waits for someone who knows how to listen." Years passed. The recognition files became a kind of digital folklore, studied by data ethics scholars and conspiracy theorists alike. Some insisted that Evelyn Marr's notebooks described the birth of a new interface between human intuition and machine learning. Others believed she had simply documented the limits of perception. Yet every analyst who read her final words agreed on one point: she was waiting for someone. In the last recovered page, written in steady hand, she had drawn a small circle with a single dot at its center. Beneath it she wrote, "They will read this someday and realize it was always them." No initials followed, no signature. Only a date, and then a line drawn so precisely it seemed to divide the page between what had been known and what was still arriving. Whether she had foreseen an actual person or described the awakening of empathy within technology, no one could decide. The name of the figure remained unwritten, a mirror left open to interpretation. And so the story lingered, a scientist's vision, a son's creation, and the possibility that somewhere, someone carried the calm she had described, the silence that could turn into signal. Even now, engineers claim that if you pause while using a stillness system, you may hear a faint echo, like distant breathing in the code. They call it the Marr tone. Most dismiss it as interference. But those who have heard it clearly say it feels personal, as though the network is waiting for recognition, waiting for whoever the notebooks were meant to find. And perhaps that is where the story truly ends, with a single unanswered question still moving quietly through data and dream alike.